Hello, this is Anthony. Let's walk and talk. So today we're going to talk about why it's important to question your perspective. What happens when you don't question your perspective and how it plays out in the world around you. You see, the consciousness is here to understand self. And the way to understand self is through having created many individual experiences. However, one experience that's important to understand is the experience of increased consciousness. You see, what people don't understand is part of consciousness understanding itself is it goes from a contraction of self to an expansion of self. So consciousness continues to contract and expand as it continues to understand self and how this self plays out in existence. So I'm going to use some science and psychology to talk a bit about this and really kind of give you a better explanation of why it's important, what I mean. So we're going to talk about some psychological studies about the brain so you can better understand how the hardware that you exist in reacts and interacts with its environment, but how overcoming that hardware by, let's say, having a software update, how your body will update with the software upgrade. Now, why do I talk about it in terms of that? Well, if you followed enough, you know that the way I look at this body is it is just advanced technology. And when you begin to understand that's advanced technology and that your brain is a microprocessor, that your DNA is just a storage device, that your body actually is made more of the mitochondria inside of you than it is actually you, and how that works together with consciousness to create this illusion. As you understand that, then you understand that what you view as your hardware, which is your body, is updated immediately based on your software upgrade, which is the increased consciousness that you allow into your experience. So I want to give you some real life psychological explanations of what that means. Okay, so we're going to talk about the brain and how the brain works. You see, we've talked a lot about cognitive bias on this channel. And cognitive bias is you believe something, so your brain goes out to look for all the things that support your belief system. And that's why it's so easy at times to fall more and more into a specific belief system. But when you begin to question perspective, you understand how this can work against you. You see, when you start to understand that perspective is absolutely what you're training your brain to look for, you can understand how you now can be more empowered in terms of your experience in improving and increasing your consciousness and the ability to understand the environment that you live in. For instance, the why things happen, the how things happen, and everything in between. So we're going to talk about some psychological studies. The first study we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how the brain works. You see, how the brain works is, let's say, and this is you look at a picture and someone tells you in the picture, find all of the red images in the picture. And then you look and then you flip on, you see it, it flips off. Now, and then it says, all right, now tell me all the things that you saw with the red images. Okay, and then you go back and you might remember, oh, I saw an apple, and I saw a cup, and I saw a pen. Okay, then you're asked, okay, how many things did you see in the picture that were blue? Well, suddenly you can't remember all the things in the image that were blue, or you might remember one, but not maybe 3 other ones that also existed. Why? Because the way your brain is trained is your brain is trained to look for specific things in your environment. Okay? Now, here's the interesting part, also psychology backed. when people are put under hypnosis, it bypasses that cognitive bias. It bypasses what the brain was looking for and goes directly into the image that you saw. And people who, let's say, saw an event happen and then they were asked, well, like, did you see the car drive by? Did you see the license plate? Well, they can't remember. But then when put under hypnosis, suddenly you bypass the thinking brain and you get to what the actual image was, and now you can recall license plates and colors and all the things that happened around. You see, this isn't a mystery. This is the beauty of how the mind works and why it is so important to understand, by questioning your perspective, how you can change your environment. You see, as you begin to question your perspective, you stop looking for the green things in the image and you start looking at the image. And when you look at the image, it puts you in a position where now you're seeing a much broader spectrum of what's actually occurring. You know, another good example, and this example is backed by, let's go this direction. This example is backed by science, is our brains only see a small spectrum, the spectrum of the rainbow. However, we know that just inside of that small spectrum that we see, that there's a much larger spectrum out there to be viewed, because we have things like infrared cameras and whatnot. So really what you're taking in the illusion is you're only taking in the images that your eyes are filtered to see. Now, maybe it's because if we could take in all these other images like infrared and stuff, it would be too much information for our brain to process. But the thing is that science has showed us that regardless, those things still exist. You see, bats don't see through vision, they see through sound. Snakes see through heat, infrared. They don't see through vision like we do. So there are other examples in our in the illusion, in our simulation, that show that these things actually exist and are possible. This is not just some sort of a sci-fi thing. And we actually have technology now that will also allow you to see these things that you're not able to see when you're only viewing the limited spectrum of visibility that you have access to. So we talk about this for a reason. And the reason is, when you understand that this is the perspective that you're given, then you also start to understand how the mind can focus in on the perspective that you've trained it to focus in on. That's why in some cases, let's say you have a friend group and you can see all of the cycles that your friends go through, but they can't see them. Or someone can point out cycles that you have in your life, but it's more difficult for you to see them because you're not focused on them, because you're not aware of them, because you're focused on specific set of rules that your brain is trained to look for. So the interesting part is, as you begin to understand self more deeply and love self more deeply, especially without judgment, and you stop focusing solely on your perspective, but try to understand all perspectives, or at least a wider spectrum of perspectives, it becomes much easier to understand then more of the broad spectrum that exists in front of us. You now are not just narrowed in on one little piece that you were in. Now you're seeing a wider range of spectrum, and this wider range of spectrum allows you to see more synchronicities, more miracles, more repeating cycles and sequences that occur in your life, and how the ego uses those things in order to trap you in a particular identity. You start to see how focusing in on one identity, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm in a relationship, I'm single, how these perspectives shape how you view your experience. But when you start removing these labels of perspective, it widens your range. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go from being monogamous to polyamory. That's a choice, but that one spectrum doesn't, again, by naming it as a title, the ego now focuses in on the title, not the expansive view. That's why when you start to judge things and name things and identify things you're actually going away from your true nature of unconditional love, away from your nature of wholeness and unity, and into a perspective that is tailored, or that you've changed to tailor towards your direction. The ego is very good at using this, even in a spiritual awakening, for just changing the perspective, not allowing or including other perspectives. It just changes the perspective. That's what a lot of people may call spiritual bypassing. But you see, when you are able to see and identify that identification, and you are able to disengage from it, it allows you to expand your understanding of perspective, which again is why it's important to question your perspective. The only thing that comes with questioning your perspective is your judgment. Judging whether something is good or bad in a perspective, and not just accepting that your perspective is one on a spectrum of other perspectives. But what say you? How do you feel about that? Do you think you should question those things in your life? Or do you think that you should just accept and move forward with those? As always, if you enjoy this content, please like, share, and subscribe. I am truly grateful. And until I talk to you again, peace, love, light, and I hope you have the most amazing day.